You stir, not to the gentle chirping of birds or the distant drone of a refrigerator, but to a symphony of decidedly less soothing sounds. Your bed, if you can even call it that, is a simple cot, perhaps a straw mattress on a wooden frame, nestled in a cramped apartment within a towering insula. This multi-story apartment block, a common dwelling for most Roman citizens, is hardly a bastion of peace and quiet. The walls, thin and likely shared with several other families, offer little insulation from the world outside, or indeed the world within. You might hear the muffled cough of your neighbor above, the rustle of a mouse in the floorboards, or perhaps the distant bleating of a goat being herded down a narrow alleyway. The pre-dawn light, a pale gray, filters weakly through a small, unglazed window, hinting at the bustling day already stirring in the streets below. As your eyes slowly adjust, you realize the air isn't quite fresh. It carries the distinct aroma of wood smoke from countless cooking fires, a hint of refuse from the street, and perhaps, if you're particularly unlucky, the faint, acrid tang of urine from an overflowing public pot. There's no snooze button here, no gentle alarm clock to ease you into consciousness. Instead, your wake-up call is the relentless, organic pulse of the city itself. Street vendors are already beginning to set up their stalls, their cries echoing up the insula's central courtyard. A cart rumbles past, its wooden wheels protesting loudly against the cobblestones. You can almost feel the vibrations through the very structure of your building. This isn't a city that sleeps in. It simply recharges for a few hours before bursting back to life with an almost aggressive enthusiasm. Your first task of the day, even before you consider breakfast, is likely to address basic hygiene. Forget elaborate bathrooms with running water in every apartment. For many Romans, a trip to the nearest public latrine would be necessary. Imagine navigating the still dark, winding staircases of your insula, stepping carefully over stray pottery shards or discarded scraps of food before venturing out into the awakening street. The public latrines, while communal, weren't always the most private or fragrant of places. You'd likely encounter dozens of your fellow citizens, all engaged in the same morning ritual, perhaps even chatting casually as they went about their business. It's a stark contrast to our modern-day isolation in the bathroom, wouldn't you agree? And speaking of privacy, historians still argue whether these latrines were truly separated by gender, or if it was more of a free-for-all, making for some truly awkward morning encounters. After this essential, if somewhat public, start to your day, you might consider a quick wash. For most, this would involve a simple basin of water and perhaps a sponge. The concept of a refreshing morning shower, as we know it, simply didn't exist for the average Roman. Instead, the daily ablutions were a more utilitarian affair, focused on cleanliness rather than invigoration. You'd splash water on your face, perhaps scrub your hands, and prepare yourself as best you could for the demands of the day. The idea of a daily full body wash was more often reserved for the afternoon trip to the baths, a social institution we'll explore in more detail later. For now, the focus is on practical readiness. The sounds of the city continue to swell. You hear the distant braying of donkeys, the clatter of amphorae being moved, and the rising crescendo of human voices. Life in ancient Rome was lived largely outdoors and in public, and the insula was merely a place to sleep and store your meager possessions. The true living happened on the streets, in the markets, and in the forums. As you prepare to descend into this cacophony, you might briefly consider the relative luxury of a domus, the private house enjoyed by wealthier Romans. Those citizens had their own latrines, perhaps even a small private bath, and certainly more space and quiet. But for you, the typical Roman, the insula is home, a vertical beehive of humanity where every creak and groan of the building tells a story of your neighbors' lives. It's a good thing you like people because you're about to be very, very close to them, whether you want to be or not. As the first rays of genuine sunlight begin to penetrate the urban canyon of Rome, your stomach rumbles with an ancient, insistent demand. Breakfast, or ientaculum, isn't quite the elaborate affair we know today. Forget your avocado toast or your bowl of cereal. For the average Roman, breakfast was a quick, functional meal, designed to provide just enough energy to face the morning's tasks. You might grab a piece of bread, perhaps yesterday's leftover panis quadratus, a round loaf often scored into 4 sections, and dip it in wine or water. Sometimes a bit of cheese, some olives, or even a few dried figs might accompany it, offering a touch of flavor to an otherwise plain start. There's no leisurely sit-down experience. This is a meal to be consumed quickly, perhaps even on your feet, as you mentally prepare for the day's hustle. Imagine the simplicity, the almost monastic practicality of it. No bustling coffee shops, no breakfast buffets, just sustenance. And speaking of sustenance, while you might find a bit of honey to sweeten things, refined sugar as we know it simply didn't exist. Sweetness came from natural sources like fruit or honey, which, let's be honest, probably made for a healthier diet overall, even if it lacked the sugary punch we're accustomed to. Historians still argue whether specific breakfast foods were regional, or if everyone across the empire ate roughly the same simple fare in the mornings. Once your quick breakfast is devoured, the next, often more time-consuming ritual begins: getting dressed. For you, a typical Roman, this isn't about choosing between jeans and a t-shirt. Oh no, it's about mastering the art of the toga. Now, you might picture the toga as a simple sheet wrapped around the body. Think again. This was a voluminous garment, often made of wool, that could be up to 18 feet long and 9 feet wide. Imagine trying to drape that gracefully around yourself without tripping, getting tangled, or looking like a sack of potatoes. It required considerable practice, often the help of a slave for the wealthier Romans, or at least a very patient friend for everyone else. The proper way to wear a toga involved intricate folds and drapes, creating specific patterns and cascades of fabric. The sinus, a large fold of fabric that hung down over the chest, was particularly tricky to arrange correctly. It was a formal garment, a symbol of Roman citizenship, and wearing it sloppily was a clear sign of social ineptitude. You wouldn't wear it for heavy labor, of course. That's what simpler tunics were for. But for any public appearance, any official business, or even just a respectable stroll through the forum, the toga was essential. It's like trying to wear a sleeping bag as a fashion statement. Mildly impractical, yet entirely expected. Beneath the toga, you'd wear a simple tunic, a basic garment usually made of wool or linen, much like a long, shapeless shirt. This was your underwear, your pajamas, and often your work clothes all rolled into one. For men, it typically fell to the knees, while women's tunics were longer, reaching their ankles. The color of your tunic, and indeed your toga, could also signal your social status. Senators, for instance, wore togas with a broad purple stripe, while ordinary citizens wore plain white ones. So, while you're fumbling with your colossal woolen sheet, you're also subtly broadcasting your position in Roman society to everyone you meet. No pressure? It's a wonder anyone got out of the house before noon. Finally, you'd slip on your calce, the typical Roman shoes. Likely simple leather sandals or enclosed shoes, depending on the weather and your daily activities. They're practical, durable, and certainly not designed for long-distance running, or, thankfully, for fitting into a toga. With your basic sustenance consumed and your elaborate, or at least voluminously simple, attire in place, you are now ready to face the roaring, bustling, and wonderfully chaotic streets of ancient Rome. Stepping out of your insula and into the street is less like opening your front door, and more like diving headfirst into a lively, slightly overwhelming river. The narrow lanes of Rome, rarely paved uniformly, are already teeming with life. The air, as we noted, is thick with the aroma of charcoal smoke from street-side food stalls, the metallic tang of sweat, and the pungent odor of the public latrines you might have just visited. You immediately notice the cacophony, the shouts of vendors hawking their wares. Hot chickpeas, get your hot chickpeas. The insistent bleating of sheep being driven to market, the sharp crack of a whip from an ox-drawn cart, and the constant underlying murmur of thousands of conversations. It's a symphony of chaos, a constant reminder that you are but one small part of this sprawling, vibrant metropolis. Your immediate goal might be to reach the forum, a temple, or perhaps a client's house. And the journey itself is an exercise in urban navigation. The streets aren't just for pedestrians. They're thoroughfares for everything from sedan chairs, carried by sweating slaves, to enormous wagons laden with goods for the markets, or building materials for the latest grand project. And these wagons, often pulled by oxen or mules, have right-of-way. Imagine trying to get your morning latte while dodging an 18-wheeler. That's your Roman commute. There's no orderly traffic flow, no sidewalks in the modern sense. It's a fluid, often frantic dance of bodies and beasts. You learn quickly to stay alert, to step aside at a moment's notice, or risk being trampled by a loaded cart. One of the curious sights you'd encounter are the street sweepers. Not necessarily civic employees, but often enslaved individuals tasked with clearing the day's accumulating refuse. Because despite the grandeur of its monuments, Rome could be a surprisingly dirty city. Garbage was often simply tossed into the streets from upper-story windows, leading to a constant layer of detritus that mixed with the mud and dust. You'd have to watch where you step, not just for the animal droppings, but for discarded food, broken pottery, and whatever else might have rained down from above. It adds a certain gritty realism to your commute, wouldn't you say? Historians still debate the exact effectiveness of Roman sanitation systems beyond the famous sewers. For many, daily life was a hands-on experience with urban grime. Amidst the general hubbub, you'd spot fascinating characters. Perhaps a soothsayer, interpreting omens from the flight of birds for a nervous client, or a scribe hunched over a wax tablet, offering to write letters for the illiterate. There are barbers setting up their makeshift chairs on the street, gossiping loudly as they trim beards, and sellers of cheap trinkets, their voices cracking as they try to entice passers-by. Every corner seems to host a mini-drama, a snapshot of Roman life unfolding before your very eyes. You might even catch a glimpse of a wealthier Roman, attended by a retinue of clients, making their grand procession to the forum, their togas perfectly draped. A stark contrast to your own battle-worn version from the morning's wrestling match. The buildings themselves lean out over the narrow streets, blocking much of the sun and creating cool, shadowy passages, even on a bright Roman day. Some insulae are so tall they seem to touch the sky, their upper stories swaying precariously in the wind. The sheer density of the population is palpable, a constant press of humanity that can be both exhilarating and utterly exhausting. There's no escaping the crowd here. Privacy is a luxury reserved for the very wealthy behind their high domus walls. For you, the street is your living room, your meeting place, your public arena. It's a vibrant, sometimes overwhelming spectacle that constantly demands your attention, forcing you to engage with the city on its own terms. After navigating the clamor of the Roman streets, perhaps dodging a particularly stubborn mule or a runaway piglet, your thoughts might turn to the mid-morning or perhaps even early afternoon, and a uniquely Roman institution: the public baths. Forget your modern notions of a quick shower or a quiet soak in a tub. The Roman baths, or thermae, were far more than just places to get clean. They were the social clubs, the fitness centers, the gossip hubs, and even the cultural centers of ancient Rome, all rolled into one steamy, bustling complex. They were open to almost everyone, from the lowliest freedman to the wealthiest senator, often for a mere quadrans, a coin so small it was practically pocket change. Imagine stepping into this grand, echoing space. The air is warm and humid, thick with the scent of olive oil, sweat, and perhaps a faint hint of perfume. The first room you might enter is the appetiterium, the changing room. Here you'd strip down, perhaps entrusting your clothes to a slave or a locker attendant, though petty theft was a common complaint, so you'd keep a wary eye on your toga. It's a bustling, noisy place, filled with the chatter of bathers, the clatter of sandals, and the general hum of anticipation. You'd probably spend a few moments stretching or warming up, as many Romans incorporated light exercise into their bath routine. Next, you might move to the palaestra, an open-air exercise yard. Here, you could engage in various physical activities: wrestling, running, lifting weights, often just heavy stones, or playing a game of trigon, a form of catch. The sounds of grunting, shouting, and the thud of bodies would mix with the general din of the baths. It's a chance to work up a good sweat, to feel the strain in your muscles, and to justify the eventual, blissful relaxation. Historians still argue about the exact sequence and duration of activities in a typical Roman bath visit, as practices varied widely depending on personal preference and the size of the complex. After your workout, it's time for the actual bathing. You'd typically start in the tepidarium, a warm, moderately humid room. This was a gentle transition zone, allowing your body to adjust to the heat. Here, you might relax, chat with friends, or simply prepare for the hotter rooms. It's a place for slow conversation, for lingering in the warmth, a gentle hum of voices filling the air. From the tepidarium, you'd progress to the caldarium, the hot room. This chamber was intensely hot and humid, often with a large, steaming pool of water. The heat would open your pores, and you'd likely scrape yourself down with a strigil, a curved metal tool to remove sweat, dirt, and olive oil, which Romans often applied before bathing to moisturize their skin. It's a surprisingly effective way to feel clean, even if it looks a bit odd to modern eyes. Imagine standing there, scraping off the grime of the day, surrounded by dozens of other Romans doing the exact same thing. It's wonderfully communal, if a bit intimate. Finally, you'd conclude your bathing ritual in the frigidarium, the cold room, featuring a large, unheated pool. This plunge into cold water was exhilarating, designed to close your pores, invigorate your senses, and snap you back to reality after the heat. It's a shocking but refreshing contrast, leaving you feeling truly cleansed and revitalized. After this, you might head back to the apoditerium to get dressed, perhaps stopping at an adjacent unctuarium for a massage, or to have perfumed oils applied to your skin. The baths were a true daily escape, a place to cleanse not just the body, but also the mind, and to engage in the vibrant social tapestry of Roman life. Refreshed and invigorated from your visit to the baths, or perhaps just feeling adequately clean for the afternoon, your thoughts inevitably drift to food. For a Roman, especially one of modest means, the main meal of the day, the cena, typically took place in the late afternoon or early evening, a much later affair than our modern dinner. But before that, you might grab a light lunch or prandium. This was often simple fare, perhaps some more bread, cheese, cold meat left over from the previous day, or fruit. It was a quick refuel, consumed without ceremony, perhaps even standing up in a bustling market or at a street stall. Think of it as a historical power bar, designed for efficiency, not enjoyment. Now, when the cena finally arrives, things get a bit more interesting, and certainly more social. For wealthier Romans, the cena could be an elaborate, multi-course banquet lasting for hours, often with entertainment. But for you, the average citizen, it's a more humble affair, usually enjoyed with your family in your insula apartment. Imagine sitting on simple stools around a small, portable table, or if you're slightly better off, perhaps reclining on couches. The Roman custom of reclining to eat, a practice reserved for formal dining, wasn't universal, especially for the working class. Historians still argue about how widespread the practice of reclining was among different social strata. For most, practical seating was probably the norm. The Roman diet, while seemingly simple, was surprisingly varied. though perhaps not in ways you'd expect. Grains, particularly wheat and barley, formed the cornerstone of every meal. You'd eat bread, porridge, or a thick gruel called pulse. Vegetables were plentiful and seasonal. Cabbage, lettuce, leeks, onions, garlic, and various legumes like lentils and chickpeas. Fruits were also common, especially figs, dates, grapes, and apples. You might be thinking, sounds healthy enough? And you'd be right mostly. However, the protein sources could be a bit different. While pork, beef, and chicken were eaten, they were often expensive. More common meat sources included cheaper cuts, offal, or wild game if you were lucky. And then there were the more peculiar Roman delicacies. Imagine, if you will, being offered dormice as a treat. These tiny rodents were specially bred and fattened in clay jars called gliraria, sometimes with nuts and honey, before being roasted or fried. It was considered a delicacy, a crispy little morsel of fat and flavor. Or perhaps you'd sample flamingo tongues or peacock brains if you were at a truly extravagant banquet. These were, of course, beyond the reach of the average Roman, but it's fun to imagine the sheer audacity of some of their culinary choices. It certainly puts your adventurous eating habits into perspective, doesn't it? As for beverages, wine was ubiquitous. It was almost always diluted with water, as drinking undiluted wine was considered barbaric. Water quality in Rome could be variable, so wine provided a safer, if slightly less hydrating, alternative. Beer existed, but it was generally viewed as a drink for barbarians from the northern provinces, while the sophisticated Roman preferred wine. So, as you finish your humble meal of porridge and vegetables, perhaps with a side of fermented fish sauce, a staple condiment called garum, you'd wash it down with a goblet of watered-down wine, reflecting on the day's events and anticipating the evening to come. With your prandium settled and the main meal of Sheena still a few hours away, the bulk of your Roman day would be dedicated to a blend of work and leisure, often intertwined in ways that might surprise you. For many, work wasn't a 9-to-5 desk job, but a more fluid, often physically demanding, engagement with the city's bustling economy. If you were a craftsman, a potter, a shoemaker, a baker, your workshop would likely be part of your home, with the front open to the street, allowing customers to easily see your wares and your work in progress. Imagine the constant hum of activity, the rhythmic thud of a hammer, the scent of fresh bread wafting out, the chatter of potential buyers. For those of a slightly higher social standing, say, a client seeking patronage, your morning would have been spent on the salutatio, a ritual visit to the home of a wealthier patron. You'd stand in line with dozens of others, waiting your turn to offer greetings, demonstrate your loyalty, and perhaps receive a small handout of food or money, or simply secure your patron's favor for the day. This wasn't just begging, it was a fundamental aspect of Roman social and political life, a complex web of mutual obligations and benefits. Your work might simply be maintaining these crucial social connections, ensuring your place in the intricate Roman hierarchy. It's like networking on steroids, but with far more bowing and scraping involved. After these morning duties, whether toiling in a workshop or performing your social obligations, Romans would seek out various forms of leisure. The public baths, as we discussed, were a primary destination, offering not just cleanliness, but also a social hub for relaxation and gossip. But there were other forms of diversion, depending on your interests and your purse. You might head to the forum, not just for political debates or legal proceedings, but also to socialize, hear the latest news or rumors, and simply watch the world go by. It was the heart of Roman public life, a vibrant outdoor living room where business and pleasure effortlessly mingled. Gambling was another popular pastime. You might find Romans huddled in taverns, or even on street corners, engaged in games of dice. While often officially frowned upon, the allure of a quick win was a powerful draw. Or perhaps you'd prefer a quieter pursuit, like visiting one of Rome's many libraries. Though not as publicly accessible as modern libraries, They offered a chance to engage with scrolls of philosophy, history, or poetry. This would be a welcome respite from the relentless noise of the streets, a rare moment of intellectual calm. Historians still argue about the exact literacy rates in ancient Rome. While many could read basic signs, widespread literary engagement varied greatly by social class. And of course, there were the grand spectacles. While not a daily occurrence, the gladiatorial games and chariot races were immensely popular and offered a thrilling escape from the mundane. Imagine the roar of the crowd in the Colosseum as gladiators clashed, or the heart-stopping excitement of chariots thundering around the Circus Maximus, with thousands of Romans cheering on their favorite team. These events were more than just entertainment. They were massive social gatherings, a way for the emperor or wealthy citizens to display their generosity, and a powerful unifying force for the Roman populace. It's a good thing you probably wouldn't have to fight to the death to keep your job, but you can certainly enjoy the spectacle. After a day of navigating the bustling streets, engaging in your work, and perhaps enjoying a leisurely bath, or even a thrilling chariot race, your thoughts might turn back to your Roman dwelling. While we've briefly touched upon the insula, your apartment in a multi-story block, it's worth taking a moment to truly wander through a Roman home. Whether it's your modest abode or the grander domus of a wealthy citizen, the domestic architecture of Rome tells its own fascinating story about privacy, social status, and daily routines. Let's imagine you're returning to your insula apartment first. You'd ascend creaking wooden stairs, perhaps dimly lit by flickering oil lamps. The apartments themselves were often small, with a few cramped rooms serving multiple purposes. A single room might function as a living area by day and a sleeping space by night, with mattresses unrolled onto the floor or simple cots like the one you woke up on. Windows, if present, were typically small and unglazed, allowing in light but little protection from the elements or the constant sounds of the city. Heating, if any, came from small charcoal braziers, which could be a fire hazard, a common concern in these tightly packed buildings. There was no running water directly into your apartment. You'd rely on public fountains or communal wells for your daily needs. It's a far cry from modern comforts, certainly, but it was home. Now, let's peek into a domus, the private house of a wealthy Roman family. This is where you truly see a different world, a sanctuary of relative peace and luxury. You'd enter not directly from the street, but through a narrow passageway, the fosses leading into the atrium. This was the heart of the Roman house, an open-roofed courtyard with a central pool, the impluvium, designed to collect rainwater. It was here that visitors would be received, and clients would wait for their salutatio. The atrium was usually adorned with frescoes, mosaics, and perhaps busts of ancestors, subtly broadcasting the family's wealth and lineage. It's like a very grand, very public foyer, designed to impress anyone who stepped inside. Surrounding the atrium were various functional rooms, small bedrooms, cubicula, often just large enough for a bed, and the tablinum, the master's study or office, usually open to both the atrium and the garden beyond. Beyond the atrium, a wealthy domus would often feature a peristyle, a colonnaded garden courtyard, perhaps even larger and more elaborate than the atrium. This was the true private oasis, a tranquil space filled with fragrant plants, fountains, and perhaps even statues. It was here that the family would relax, dine, and entertain intimate friends, away from the public gaze of the atrium. Historians still debate the exact symbolism and practical uses of every single room in a domus, as layouts varied significantly. Kitchens in Roman homes, even wealthy ones, were often small and relegated to a less prominent area, as much of the cooking was done by enslaved cooks. Dining rooms, or triclinia, were specifically designed for the reclining couches, allowing for lavish banquets. And while the wealthy had private latrines and even small bath suites, the concept of a dedicated modern-style bathroom was still far off. Light came from natural sources like the open atrium and peristyle, and from oil lamps at night. Heating might be provided by a hypocaust system, underfloor heating, which was a remarkable feat of engineering for its time, circulating hot air from a furnace beneath the floors and through the walls. So, while your insula might offer basic shelter, a domus was a self-contained world of relative comfort and undeniable status. As you settle into the rhythm of daily Roman life, moving between your home, the streets, and the social hubs, you'd quickly become aware of the myriad rules and regulations that governed every aspect of society. Ancient Rome, for all its grandeur, was a place governed by a complex, often bewildering system of odd laws that could impact your daily routine in unexpected ways. Some were practical, some moralistic, and some, frankly, just peculiar. Take, for instance, the laws concerning public funerals. While the death of a loved one was a deeply personal event, Roman funerals often involved large public processions, sometimes accompanied by musicians and professional mourners. To prevent these processions from becoming too extravagant or disruptive, there were laws limiting the number of flutes that could be played and prohibiting women from tearing their faces or wailing excessively. Imagine trying to enforce that last one. Ma'am, your lamentations are exceeding the legal decibel limit. It certainly puts a damper on a good cry, doesn't it? Historians still debate the true motivations behind such sumptuary laws. Some say it was about controlling public disorder, others about curbing excessive displays of wealth. Then there were the laws about inheritance and property. Roman law was incredibly detailed when it came to ownership and contracts. You might find yourself subject to a law that dictates exactly how many guests you can invite to a dinner party, or even what kind of dishes you can serve, all designed to curb ostentatious displays of wealth. While perhaps less relevant to your daily insula life, these laws show the Roman desire to control even the most private aspects of citizen behavior. It's like the government deciding whether you can have a second serving of dormice at your next dinner party. Another fascinating area of Roman law involved public spaces. Imagine the chaos if there were no rules about navigating those narrow streets we discussed. While not perfectly enforced, there were regulations about the movement of carts within the city. For much of the day, particularly during daylight hours, wheeled vehicles were often restricted in central Rome to reduce congestion. This meant that goods had to be delivered at night, contributing to the symphony of noise that would have permeated your sleeping hours. So, while you're trying to drift off, you'd hear the rumbling of wagons delivering amphorae of wine or building stones. It's a trade-off, really. Quieter days, noisier nights. And let's not forget the quirky sumptuary laws related to clothing. While the toga was a symbol of citizenship, there were periods when laws attempted to dictate what materials or colors could be worn by certain classes, or how much jewelry women were allowed to display. While these laws were often difficult to enforce and frequently ignored, they highlight a constant tension in Roman society between individual freedom and collective order. It's almost as if they wanted to stop you from wearing that truly fabulous purple tunic, even if it brought you immense joy. Even seemingly minor offenses could fall under the purview of Roman law. Vandalism, disturbing the peace, or even public drunkenness could lead to fines or other punishments. While Rome had no formal police force as we understand it, various officials and informal social pressures helped maintain order. You learned quickly that while the streets were a free-for-all, there were still lines you shouldn't cross, lest you incur the wrath of a particularly officious aedile, or the collective disapproval of your neighbors. The legal system was complex, with different courts for different types of cases, and for many Romans, engaging with the law was a frequent, if sometimes confusing, part of daily life. Having navigated the legal quirks of Roman society, you might at some point find yourself facing a more personal challenge, illness or injury. And this is where the world of ancient Roman health and medicine truly diverges from anything you know. Forget sterile hospitals and advanced diagnostics. Roman medicine was a fascinating blend of practical experience, inherited wisdom, superstition, and a healthy dose of what we would now consider quackery. If you fell ill, your first recourse might not be to a highly trained doctor, but perhaps to a family member or an elder with knowledge of traditional remedies. Many common ailments were treated with herbal concoctions, poultices, and simple home remedies passed down through generations. Imagine being given a strange-smelling brew made from ground-up herbs, or having a hot compress applied to a throbbing wound. The effectiveness varied wildly, of course, but for minor complaints, these methods could offer some relief, or at least the comforting feeling of being cared for. For more serious conditions, you might consult a physician or medicus. Roman doctors weren't all uniform in their training or practice. Some were highly skilled, having studied in places like Greece or Alexandria, learning about anatomy, often from dissecting animals, as human dissection was rare, and pharmacology. Others were little more than charlatans, promising miraculous cures for a fee. You'd find them in the markets, advertising their services, often with little more than a glib tongue and a few basic tools. Historians still debate the overall efficacy of Roman medical practices, noting a mix of surprisingly advanced surgical techniques for the time, alongside a pervasive reliance on magical thinking. One of the more peculiar aspects of Roman medicine involved their understanding of the human body. While they had some grasp of anatomy, the concept of circulation, for instance, was unknown. Illnesses were often attributed to imbalances of humors, black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood, a theory inherited from the Greeks. Treatments, therefore, often aimed to rebalance these humors, perhaps through bloodletting, purging, or inducing vomiting. Imagine feeling unwell and having a doctor suggest that the best course of action is to have a leech applied to your skin or to consume a powerful laxative. It certainly adds a layer of adventurous discomfort to being sick. And then there were the more unconventional treatments. For instance, gladiator blood was sometimes used as a supposed cure for epilepsy, believed to transfer the strength and vitality of the fallen warrior to the patient. Or consider the use of certain minerals, or even animal parts, often with little scientific basis beyond ancient tradition or sympathetic magic. If you had a headache, you might be advised to wear a wreath of laurel leaves. For insomnia, a cup of poppy juice might be prescribed. Beyond the purely medical, the Romans also placed great stock in religious healing and superstition. If you were gravely ill, you might make a pilgrimage to a temple dedicated to a healing deity, like Asclepius. You'd sleep in the temple, hoping for a divine dream that would reveal the cure, or perhaps even experience a miraculous recovery. Offerings would be left and prayers recited, acknowledging that sometimes even the most skilled medicus could only do so much. So, while you might find a skilled surgeon capable of setting a broken bone, or even performing a rudimentary cataract removal, you'd also be surrounded by a world where a headache might be cured by a charm, and serious illness could be attributed to an angry god. It's a good thing you probably had a strong constitution to begin with. Having navigated the strange world of Roman medicine, let's now turn our attention to the youngest members of Roman society. What was it like growing up Roman? Your childhood in ancient Rome, depending heavily on your social standing, would have been a fascinating blend of play, strict discipline, and a remarkably pragmatic approach to education. For the vast majority of Roman children, especially those in your insula, childhood was not an extended period of carefree play. From a very young age, children were expected to contribute to the household. Girls, in particular, would learn domestic skills from their mothers: cooking, spinning wool, weaving cloth, and managing the household. Their education was largely practical, preparing them for their eventual roles as wives and mothers. Boys, too, would learn from their fathers or older male relatives, often assisting in their workshops or accompanying them to the forum, absorbing the rhythms of Roman commerce and social interaction. There was no concept of a gap year before entering the workforce. Responsibility came early and often. Formal schooling, while it existed, was not universal and often came at a cost. If you were lucky enough to attend school, your day would begin early, often at dawn. You'd carry your wax tablet for writing and your stylus, a pointed instrument for incising letters, to a simple schoolroom, which might be nothing more than a rented space in a private house or even a corner of a public colonnade. Your teacher, the ludi magister, might be a freedman or a Greek slave, and the curriculum would be quite basic: reading, writing, and arithmetic. Imagine learning to write by scratching letters into wax, then smoothing it over to erase your mistakes. It was practical, reusable, and definitely less messy than ink. Discipline in Roman schools was notoriously harsh. Floggings and beatings were common, considered a necessary part of the learning process. The phrase, "spare the rod and spoil the child," might as well have been invented by a Roman schoolmaster. So, while you're trying to carefully form your letters on the wax tablet, you'd always have the threat of a stinging lash hanging over your head. It certainly kept students attentive, if not entirely enthusiastic. Historians still argue about the psychological impact of such strict disciplinary methods on Roman children, and whether it truly fostered greater respect for learning, or simply fear. As you progressed, if your family could afford it, your education might expand. Beyond the basic ludi magister, you might move on to a grammaticus, who would teach you Greek and Latin literature, focusing on poetry, history, and rhetoric. For the truly elite boys, the final stage of education involved a rhetor, who would train them in public speaking and legal argumentation, essential skills for a career in politics or law. Girls from wealthy families might also receive a private education, focusing on literature, music, and sometimes even philosophy, though their public roles remained limited. But childhood wasn't all work and discipline. Roman children did play. They had dolls made of clay or rag, toy chariots, balls for various games, and board games like Ludus Latrunculorum, a strategy game similar to chess. Imagine running through the streets, playing tag with your friends amidst the bustling crowds, or fashioning a rudimentary toy soldier from a stick and some scrap cloth. The sounds of children playing would have been a constant backdrop to Roman life, just as they are today. So while life was tough, especially for the poor, there were still moments of innocent joy and discovery, even in the shadow of the mighty Roman Empire.